Volteface TV, my name is Ponov, I'm the director at Volteface, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by my good friend...
Katya Kowalski, who's also at Volteface.
Good to speak to you, mate. Thanks for coming
Yeah,
on.
good to speak to you. Not like we weren't on a Zoom call right before this.
Yeah, how straight, it's so weird speaking to each
Yeah,
other,
it's
isn't
very
it?
formal.
It's like we don't do this all day. Thanks for jumping on. Let's get straight into it. We're going to talk about the report Known Unknowns, which came out a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago-ish. I guess a week and a half, right?
Yeah, I think 12 days ago.
12 days of Christmas. And we launched it in Parliament, which was a lot of fun, didn't we? We did a nice little Westminster event. First time I
Yeah,
was
it
doing a
was very
Westminster event
fun.
for a while.
A very warm room.
It was a warm room. Well, it was warm in friendly people, but also like
Warm and very just warm in temperature.
yeah,
Warm in a grand, intimidating room.
yeah.
Good.
It was nice doing an actual event for the first time
Yeah, it
since
was nice to
COVID.
actually see people in the flesh and not just organize like a webinar or something on Zoom.
Yeah, good. And you can't beat that venue. You can't beat doing the House of Parliament for an event. It's like such a
Yeah,
class
there's
spot to do
something
anything.
quite grand and special about actually being in Westminster,
Yeah.
debating and talking about important subjects and being in rooms where important things happen.
Yeah, it was good. So let's get straight into the report. I guess you spoke about the report so much to so many people. You've done a lot of speaking occasions talking about this report. So I don't want you to just feel like we're going back through the motions. So let's try and just think about the report generally. What were the kind of main things that came out of the report that maybe surprised you or you weren't expecting when you started doing the piece of work?
Yeah, well, I guess like just to give a very quick background, Known Unknowns was a report that looked at the limitations of medical cannabis prescribing to date and I spoke directly to doctors about what their kind of major barriers and hesitancies are with feeling comfortable prescribing cannabis. And it was a really, I guess, an eye-opening experience speaking directly to these clinicians, because I think a lot of the chat that we have within the cannabis space is, within very much within our own echo chamber, and people identify issues and we kind of see the same arguments get recycled over and over again. So this was quite refreshing. I think what was quite surprising to me was that doctors were interested in cannabis. I think, naturally doctors are quite intrinsically interested in learning about new medicines and kind of expanding their formulary and understanding of things. But we're quite, I guess, unsure about how to approach cannabis. And I think on reflection, a lot of that comes down to the way in which cannabis was legalized in the first place and this kind of skepticism building within the medical community. I would say that the vast majority of doctors that I spoke to kind of cited this media campaign and kind of governmental intervention with like on the topic of cannabis that made them feel a bit uncertain, because for any other kind of medicine that we see get rescheduled and licensed, it goes through quite rigorous testing, years of evidence building, taking on quite that kind of long-winded scientific method.
Yeah.
And that just wasn't the case for cannabis. So we're kind of going backwards in that regard. So I think understandably so, there was that skepticism and hesitancy coming out.
We were talking about that yesterday, weren't we? Someone asked us, we were doing like a workshop, and someone said, why is the UK behind in terms of numbers and clinical buy-in versus Germany, Australia, Israel? And we were talking about this, weren't we? We were reflecting on the speed and process by which it was legalised. Wasn't that inclusive?
I think initially when they asked that, like me and you kind of like were thinking, we were like unsure, and then as we were chatting about it, we kind of came to that realization, kind of put two and two together.
Yeah, the clinical groups must have felt quite left out. Like, all right, okay, so we're rescheduling, are we? Right, fine.
Yeah,
I guess that's happened.
It's like I just mentioned this, but like I feel like we're kind of going backwards and doing things the other way around, because usually, I mean, we're seeing it with compounds like psilocybin now, which are kind of traditional drug reform topics, going through that rigorous evidence testing and evidence building, which is awesome. And like we're seeing evidence being gathered for cannabis, but yeah, we're kind of putting in many ways like the cart before the horse.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think came out from the research was the stigma as well that exists in the clinical community, or just in the general public. And again, that sounds like that's something else which has hindered the UK, maybe some very specific UK stigma when compared to
I
other
think
places like
so.
Germany,
Yeah,
Israel
I
and
think
stuff.
that really falls into the kind of third theme of barriers that I found with the uniqueness of cannabis. And that's obviously quite vast, but that recreational association to the drug, yeah, and seeing it very much as a drug of abuse, because many clinicians were quite familiar with cannabis, being quite and well aware that their patients are self-medicating it or using it recreationally. And interestingly enough, many noted that their patients kind of claim to get some benefit out of it. But I think there is this just like distinct separation of like seeing it something recreational and that clinicians don't really necessarily want to engage with.
Yeah.
And it's tricky because I do think that there needs to be a distinct separation between medical and recreational, but I think that's a lot easier said than done, because yes, like medical cannabis has legitimate distinctive medical value, and we see it with children with severe epilepsy and people that have really debilitating severe conditions. But then on the kind of other side of the spectrum, there is that kind of therapeutic and wellness element of cannabis. And I think separating recreational out from medical is difficult because there is that fine balance and balance to strike between pain relief and enjoyment, much like how someone might enjoy having a glass of wine in the evening to unwind and relax and help go to sleep or relieve like anxieties from work. Others can kind of get that from cannabis. So there is that, like, on that kind of one end of the spectrum, it can be quite difficult to separate that out. So I can see why, from a doctor's point of view, they struggle to get their head around that.
Yeah. And we see that in other emerging markets, don't we, in North America, how recreational kind of washes over medical. And that's an interesting nuance to it, isn't it? That, we need research and evidence on cannabis. We need trials to be done. We need to build the evidence and the efficacy to demonstrate the power, the benefits of the medicine and the challenges and dangers of the medicine. It's for both those things. We're not in the kind of like it's a magic drug, it cures everything camp. There
I think that was
some really
that was a
good and bad
massive
thing to
thing
that.
that.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's
Well,
fine. No,
I'm talking over you.
No, you
Continue.
take it. It's absolutely fine. I was just going to make the point that, like, but in those markets that have seen reform and we're like, oh, great, Canada's legalized, the States, there's all these states that are legalized. Recreational kind of just washes over the medical, and then there's no reason for those companies to commission and do research because the recreational market is so vast that they just kind of service that. So sometimes, do you know what I mean? We've kind of seen that happen.
Which is a shame, though, I think, because I think it does take away from that legitimate medical use, and it hurts it at the end of the day. The people that it's affecting most are patients, and there are patients that are probably absolutely fine and happy to go down that recreational route, but there's patients that really need that very specific controlled and metered dosing that would benefit from further research and further innovation with, like, how dosing and administration is done.
Yeah. There were some doctors you spoke to that were just like, just legalize it.
Yeah, I did find that interesting. Just like there was I'd say this wasn't like a view held by all, but some doctors did speak about the fact that legalizing it recreationally would just like take away this issue for them, which is interesting because I can see the like value in that, but I also think, like I just mentioned, there is that portion of patients that really need distinct medical supervision and need a very specific dose to make sure that their conditions kept under control.
Yeah, definitely. So you kind of, you worked at length, you spoke to many doctors about this. There were a bunch of frames and concerns that came forward, and I guess you've spoke about them a lot, and like to go through them would be fairly detailed. So we maybe just point out that I've got it up on the screen, but people can download the full report for free from our website. We don't ask for any of your details or take your email address or anything like that. You can just download it absolutely free and read it. But so if people want to know more about those concerns and those key areas, maybe we direct them to a report. But what do we do about all this? Like, you kind of looked into this, realized some of those limitations, realized some of those challenges. What do you think the whole space can do and the UK sector can do to address some of these things and move forward?
I think one of the main reflections coming out of this is that cannabis to date, at least from a clinician's point of view, has been treated as this exceptional medicine, and due to that, it sits on the fringes. We've already talked about the way in which cannabis was legalized, has created a lot of this hesitancy and skepticism. But we saw cannabis clinics get set up kind of from the point of legalization, which at that time was kind of the only way to really get expand and bring about patient access. But I think those clinics are perceived to be limited from a doctor's perspective. Doctors I spoke to touched on the fact that you don't see a single drug clinic in any other medicine area. It would be, I think, very strange to see an opioid clinic or a benzodiazepine clinic or any other, or an antibiotic, even like an antibiotics clinic. There's, I think, an expectation that you go to your doctor. He or she, advises you on what's wrong with you, what treatment you require, and then takes it from there and prescribes you an appropriate dose and type of medicine. But I think the way in which we've structured the medical cannabis industry today, it just doesn't really reflect that. You see a specialist from a cannabis clinic, which decides whether you're eligible or not, and then prescribes you cannabis. And so I think to really to make doctors feel more comfortable and see cannabis like any other medicine, we should start treating it like any other medicine. And I think if we move away from that kind of single drug clinic model, we'll see doctors' perceptions change with regards to, I guess, seeing cannabis as this panacea. Because I think that was one of the main negative reflections and kind of skepticisms amongst the medical community, is that there's this kind of bias in the sector and that people just want to sell cannabis to the masses. And I think we need to start treating it like a serious and legitimate medicine. And so like promoting that independent prescribing and bringing cannabis just into everyday routine practice is definitely a way of achieving that. There's obviously loads of factors at play and loads of stuff that could be done, but I think that's like restructuring the way in which we prescribe it will definitely help. Like still within the realms of like the current policy framework.
It feels like there's a place for clinics. It just doesn't feel like it should only be clinics, right?
Yeah, exactly.
There's definitely a use there.
To date, clinics have been vital in providing patients with access, providing a legal route for patients to access the medicine. And I'm not anti-clinic. I just think that I think the initial clinics and the creation of the clinics kind of brought in the doctors that were enthusiastic and really passionate and interested in the subject, which is fantastic. But now I think it's about speaking to those doctors that aren't enthusiastic or passionate, or quite on the opposite end of the spectrum, that are really hesitant and worried about cannabis. And I think making it as easy as possible, and as making them feel like cannabis isn't this scary and like biased industry.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a decent overview of the report. People, if they want to see it in full, can go on the website, Kat, and download it. And I know we are always up for discussions and chats on people's reflections and thoughts and feedback on the report. We're pretty open to engagement about it. And we've got a bunch of other things, haven't we, off the back of this report that we're going to be doing in the kind of like clinical space, speaking to other doctors and keeping the conversation going. Because it felt like there was a really good response from clinicians. It felt like even those that weren't prescribing cannabis were really interested in a conversation and learning more about it and getting engaged.
Loads of questions. And I think it's all about, engaging this community, because I think they feel like they haven't been sufficiently engaged to date. And like we talked about in the report, I think now it's about really expanding and getting this framework that we've got in place up to the speed and to the like capacity that it can be, before we go out and try and advocate for like further legislation change for medical cannabis.
Yeah, definitely.
But we're always open to chatting about the report at length. So do let us know your thoughts. And always about for a chat.
Definitely. Cool. Thanks, mate. I think that ticks the box. That gives everyone a quick overview of the report, signpost them in the direction if they want to learn more. And unless you've got anything else to add, I'll wrap things up.
No, I don't think I do. Cool. Thanks for watching, guys.
Nice one. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Cheers.